So we have a whole bunch of updates for you with regard to Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Just before I play you the latest, let me bring everybody up to speed. So you'll recall that he was wrongfully deported to El Salvador, country that he had been, the judicial system had come and said, you cannot deport him to El Salvador. The government admitted the mistake, but refused to bring him back in spite of a Supreme Court decision saying you should try to enable his return. Okay. Government ultimately kind of buckles, does allow him to come back, but charges him with these series of crimes, including alleged human trafficking, and sort of use that as a cover and a pretext for why, oh, we're not really backing down and allowing him back. Instead, we want to bring him back and charge him. Okay. So in the context of that trial, he was released pending the actual court date. So he's released last week. Now he had to go back to check in at the Baltimore ICE office, and they ended up detaining him. And I'll give you the rest of what they plan to do next. But first, let's take a look at Abrego Garcia speaking at a rally outside of that Baltimore ICE office before turning himself in, being re-detained. And we also have some images here of him saying goodbye to his wife, who does happen to be an American citizen. Let's take a listen to this.
This is why I want to thank each and every one of you who marched, lift your voices, never stop praying, and continue to fight in my name.
Gracias a mi pareja de vida y toda mi familia.
Thank you to my life partner and wife, Jennifer, to my brother, Cesar, to my mother, Cecilia, to my children, to my nieces and nephews, to all of my family.
All right, so let's go ahead and put the next piece up on the screen. This is a tear sheet with the very latest development. So he turns himself in, he is rearrested, and the government indicates that they want to deport him to Uganda. He can't be deported to El Salvador, so they've decided that they want to deport him to Uganda. That move has now been at least temporarily blocked by a federal judge. Let me go ahead and read a little bit of this Politico story to give you some of the twists and turns here. So they said a federal judge temporarily blocked the Trump administration's bid to deport Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Salvadoran man who has become a symbol of Trump's mass deportation agenda, to Uganda. This judge on Monday ordered the administration to keep Abrego in a detention facility in Virginia while she weighs his renewed effort to prevent immigration officials from abruptly casting him out of the country for a second time in 5 months. This is a critical part and helps to create, an understanding about what his legal challenge will be based on. So his lawyers say that the administration had offered to deport him to Costa Rica, something that he agreed to. He accepted that, but they said they would only allow him to be deported to Costa Rica if he pleaded guilty to the human smuggling charges that he faces in Tennessee. So he refused to plead guilty in exchange for being able to be deported to Costa Rica. And so in order to punish him for not pleading guilty to these human trafficking charges, which appear to be pretty flimsy at best, in order to punish him for that, they have said, okay, instead we're going to deport you to Uganda. That is the specific piece that is likely to come under close scrutiny from this judge. At a hearing Monday afternoon, that Judge Zinnes said she had several concerns about the rapid-fire deportation proceedings, noting Abrego might be entitled to go to his designated country of choice, Costa Rica, rather than Uganda. She also said if the Justice Department used his deportation as a cudgel to coerce a guilty plea, it would be a violation of his constitutional rights. Quote, "You can't condition the relinquishment of constitutional rights in that regard." So that sort of brings you guys up to speed. He's been rearrested. I think, one of the obvious conclusions to draw is that if they want to deport him before his criminal trial even occurs, tells you something, Saagar, I think, about the strength of the evidence that they feel they have against him. I think we always suspected when they brought him back and threw these charges at him that it was pretty flimsy, pretty pretextual. They have never been able to, no judge has ever found he was even a gang member, let alone a gang leader. The traffic stop that this alleged human smuggling charge is coming based on, the officers who evaluated him at the scene, let him go, no charges were filed, et cetera. So the fact they want to get him out of the country before he even has his date in court If this was truly some violent gang leader, human trafficker, etc., you would think you would want to lock him behind bars, not just release him into whatever random country you decide.
Look, we can't deny the Trump administration, everything they've said has been bullshit. And that's just basically true
Yes.
about this. And listen, some of us got taken for a ride. I'll raise my hand and I'll admit it. Basically, not only in the original deportation, the MS-13 stuff, the case, I read it. Most of the accusations, they're not particularly well-founded. So that's the truth. They're using the Uganda thing. Broadly, it seems as some sort of like pay scheme for, for pleading guilty. So that's it. And they want to make an example broadly for deportation.
Yeah.
So I think that's fair. And I'll put that all out there just so people know that I'm trying to approach this in a fair enough way. I do think it's still worth considering, how does this guy who's lived here since, what is it? Let me get the date correctly. Is it 2013? I'm fairly certain. 2011, I apologize. 2011, and he doesn't speak a word of English, and he can't give a press conference. How is that acceptable? And that's like the more broad question that I think all of us need to answer here. Abrego Garcia illegally entered our country in 2011. He was not removed during that entire period. He came actually as an unaccompanied minor to join his brother, who also came here illegally. In that time period, does not acquire the ability to speak English, is a low-skilled laborer who has not graduated from high school. And the broad current position is that he should be allowed to stay here and get some sort of pathway to citizenship. In my opinion, it all falls apart for his whole deportation to Uganda thing when his lawyer quite literally says with a straight face, you can't deport him to a country where he doesn't speak the English, doesn't speak the language. D4, please. Let's go ahead and play it.
It is preposterous that they would send him to Africa, to a country where he doesn't even speak the language, a country with documented human rights violations, when there are so many other options. This family suffered enough. They need to stop trying to separate them.
The official language of Uganda is English. That is a tacit admission that he doesn't speak the language of English. This is the point that I think people really need to grapple with.
Isn't it English and Swahili?
Well, yeah, but I mean, English is one of their official languages. My point is just more broadly that he has lived here since 2011, doesn't speak English. His day laborer, by his own admission, has literally been in this country for more than a decade. And this is the type of person that we are supposed to say should get amnesty and a pathway to citizenship. I think everyone should sit with that. Like, that is preposterous. We just had an argument earlier in our show about the best and the brightest. That's not what this looks like. And I'm not putting him down as a human being. I don't think his human worth is less. His worth to the United States as an addition, and if we were to legalize that person, statistically, what happens to somebody who doesn't have a high school education, who doesn't speak any English, if that person is legally a United States citizen? They're gonna be on welfare, okay? That's just the basic truth.
But he's not.
Huh?
And in fact, you're not right that he's a day laborer. He's a sheet metal worker for Local 100, Smart Local 100 in Maryland, who defended him, by the way, in the process of all of this.
Yes, I understand.
And I'm also curious what you make of the rights of his American citizen wife and his American citizen children, who are also being dramatically punished because the Trump administration made a mistake in their deportation of him, violated a lawful court order, and refused to make it right.
I'm acknowledging that.
That's why they're making an example of him and trying to make his life miserable, accusing him of crimes that there is no evidence that he has committed, smearing him in the public eye. And so
I'm acknowledging every word you said.
I disagree on every level with your characterization of who he is and his value and worth to society. You know, I think the fact that he's a sheet metal worker apprentice, yes, I think that's important. I think that's valuable to the country. He's clearly assimilated enough to have an American wife and American kids.
That's a commentary on America, though, that you can live here and have children and apparently have a U.S. citizen wife and not speak any English. That's a huge problem.
I don't even know that.
I don't know how this is. I don't know how this is acceptable.
Saagar, here's the other thing, though. I don't even know that, like, there's a big difference between being able to speak any English and being able to give a press conference in front of media and feel comfortable in your level of fluency.
Okay.
Those are two very different things. So I haven't personally administered an English language test to him. I know you haven't either. So, you know, to hinge his citizenship and whether or not he should be punished and abused in this way on what his level of fluency is in the English language, I think is preposterous.
Why is that preposterous?
Clearly he has assimilated.
If you can't speak enough English to give your defense in English, why should you be a citizen? It's ridiculous.
Clearly he has assimilated enough to be fully integrated into a work community, into a social community, into having, again, an American citizen, wife, and kids. And I think it's thoroughly disgusting that the Trump administration, rather than admit they made a mistake, has sought to absolutely destroy this man in order to make a point and to never back down. That is really the core of what's going on.
That's why I'm separating the two, because I agree with you, okay? They lied to us. It's absolutely true. 100%. Absolutely 100%. They're smearing him. They deported him wrongfully. In my opinion, he should have been deported a long time ago, but whatever, okay? We are where we are today. Do I think he should be sent to Uganda? No, all right? Even Costa Rica doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm sure we should go through the process. I think his asylum claim is bullshit, in my opinion, because the vast majority of these asylum claims are bullshit, especially in a country which dramatically less violent. You can't really fear as much now. Perhaps his fear is from the government. I guess it's a different story. Again, we can litigate all of that in court. So I'm going to put my cards there very closely on the table. But again, at a basic level, you cannot have a society where if you have lived here for over a decade and you cannot present yourself in English, you cannot be a citizen. Now, the point about being able to assimilate is actually the opposite, because the problem is we have now vast numbers of illegal immigrants and others who come to the United States and have pockets where English is not spoken. That is not acceptable. And the even more broad point, very importantly, is about not only assimilation, but also the economic value. Yes, I understand. It's very hard for liberals to talk about this. But when you're talking about the addition of new entrants into your country, you need to have an assurance that those people will be able to stand on their own feet.
And he does.
There is no.
He does.
Okay.
Is he on welfare?
No. But note what you just said. Note what you just said specifically about sheet level apprentice. That's part of the reason I said day level work laborer. And if you also look previously, hanging out in the Home Depot parking lot where he was arrested in 2019, is the quite literal definition of day laboring. Now, when you put that together, and on top of
better himself and achieve a more stable job,
on top of lack of English proficiency, it is obvious that question should be asked: how can this person be allowed to stay in the United States, and should they be allowed to become a citizen? Again, this is the problem. Broadly, with speaking of immigrants as a broad group, you're trying to loop in like Nobel Prize winning scientists with somebody who's a day laborer who doesn't speak in English, who also entered the country illegally. Those two are not fundamentally the same. I believe you've agreed with me in the past that there should be a requirement for English language proficiency to become a citizen. I don't even think you should be able to get a work visa or anything if you don't speak any English. Now, in this particular case, this is a problem and an emblem of our broken immigration system.
So let me
it should not work for Kilmar Garcia.
If he spoke English to your level of, whatever your standard is,
sure,
can he stay?
Well, no, but that's not the point.
So then why are you making that the point?
Because it's an example of how somebody who has lived here from 2011 doesn't speak English. That is an insane thing that nobody apparently on the left wants to grapple with.
No, but Saagar,
we have tens of millions of people here who don't speak any English.
It does not offend me the way that it does. I will certainly acknowledge that to be the case. We don't have an official language as a country. Our history,
I think Trump has
our history and tradition as a nation has been, there's always been these immigrant pockets and communities.
Yes, and they cause
a
lot of issues.
A generation later, guess what their kids are? Fully integrated Americans. So yes, for some people, you know what? I'm not that great at learning foreign languages either. For some people who come here, it may be more of a struggle to be able to acquire the language and the level of fluency, that you're looking for. We also don't have right now. If we had a pathway to citizenship that was conditional upon English language acquisition, I have no doubt that he would pursue that in order to be able to meet the metrics that are set out by the government. We don't have that, so there is no motivation for him to learn the language outside of whatever level he is. Which again, I don't even know whether he is English language proficient or not.
We have to design it for his motivation? No, the motivation again should not be working for the people who broke the law and entered our country illegally since 2011. Let me underscore that. 2011, this person has lived here. I'm not putting down his worth as a human. I think he has been treated very badly by the U.S. government. If he actually stays and prosecutes, he'll probably get himself a settlement.
Here's what bothers me, Saagar, is look, your view is legitimate, and there's obviously we have profound disagreements about the level of immigration that should be permitted into this country and the value of immigrants who come into this country. What bothers me about your approach is you're more outraged about this man who Okay, yes, he crossed the border illegally.
Yes.
Outside of that, zero evidence he did anything wrong. Applied for asylum, went through the process, followed the court order, all of these sorts of things, right? Contributing to society, becomes a sheet metal apprentice, marries an American wife, by all accounts is a good dad, was there with his disabled son when he gets arrested, etc. You are more upset about that one man than you are about this government lying, trying to ruin his life, accusing him of crimes he did not commit. And we can put this DHS tweet D3 up on the screen. That you have a government that can just, to the whole world, smear someone who has not been found guilty of any of this. Says DHS is thrilled that this MS-13 gang member, human trafficker, wife beater, child predator is being processed for removal to Uganda. That the government, which has infinitely more power than Kilmar Abrego Garcia, could do this, and that's not your primary outrage. That to me is just, that's hard for me to wrap my head around.
I completely understand where you're coming from, and I'll explain it very clearly. It's because I think for you and for most people, they view Kilmar as an American. I don't think he's an American. I don't think he should be. I think he is an emblem of a broken society.
Honestly, it's irrelevant to me whether he's an American.
But that's kind of my point.
This is about a government that will do this to him, will do it to anyone. Anyone.
But see, I actually, first of all, I don't think that that's true.
It is, of course it's
and
true.
And second, because
of course it's true.
It's not true.
Look
because
at Saagar, look at
nobody
how they
American has
behave.
been deported to CCOT. Now, again, I have openly said I was totally
Americans
100%
have been
wrong.
arrested by ICE and detained for lengthy periods of time. You do have massive crackdowns on the speech of Americans.
Yeah,
and
which have
he is
spoken out
married
about.
to an American. What about her rights? Why don't you care about what this is doing to her life, since you're focused first and foremost on the rights of American citizens?
She's not being prosecuted, as far as I know, from the
Her
U.S.
life is
government.
being ruined.
Yes,
Come on,
well,
let's be honest.
Well,
Her life
she
is
married
being
somebody
ruined.
who was here illegally, and when you do that, there are consequences. I mean, so just because somebody who's married to somebody who is legal, they get absolved of all crimes? If I marry a drug dealer, they get absolved of being drug dealer?
Part of our immigration system is meant to enable American citizens to be able to marry who they want. I mean, that's why we have a process for people to be able to obtain green cards and then ultimately become permanent residents and naturalized citizens based on getting their marriage to an American citizen. And so, that seems to not enter into your equation either. But again,
but he didn't. You're reversing terms, because he came here illegally before he got married. He broke the law long before any of this happened. If his U.S. citizen wife had gone down to El Salvador, met him down in El Salvador, tried to bring him back here, it's a little bit of a different story.
So she deserves to have her life ruined and her family broken apart, and these American kids to lose their dad, and him be shipped to Uganda and locked up, and have the whole weight of the federal government set against this one man because they won't admit that they made a mistake. I mean, that is such an abuse of power. And I don't know why you think that anyone, American citizen or not, is going to be protected from that abuse of power when clearly this government is willing to lie, to ignore court orders, to refuse the Supreme Court order, to put out there scurrilous allegations with no basis in fact. There's no limiting principle on that whatsoever.
Again, I think it's entirely fair, and to the extent it has affected Americans, I have spoken repeatedly against it. Now, again, it gets to the outrage, and it's about the system, and I think he represents the 30, nobody even knows what the actual number is. It could be 30 million, it could be 50 million, apparently, according to more recent statistics. I have no clue, but my point is I am outraged by the fact that we have literal lawlessness, which is endorsed and was created by the previous administration, which has wreaked mass social chaos and a lot of very bad effects. I think it's a good thing to make sure that people who are here illegally, who in my opinion are, not just opinion, I think there's a lot of studies to back it up, are depressing American wages and also are basically being used as like quasi cutouts for big business. All of that, I think, is really bad. I think somebody should try to fix it. And instead, this becomes an emblem for the outrage of the Trump administration, which by the way, I blame entirely on the Trump administration, and they have lost me 100% in their ability to ever convince me of what they're telling the truth. That's why on the Kilmar case, I'm like, look, I'm going to read it for myself. I'm not sitting here saying he's some gang member or anything like that. I don't think he deserves to be beaten or tortured or sent to Uganda. I don't think that that generally is how any human being deserves to, quote, be treated. So I will totally accept everything you're saying. I am talking specifically about the next step for if the Democrats and the liberals have their way, which is he becomes a citizen. I'm totally against that. Not just him, but the representation of mass pockets of the United States of America where English is not spoken. It's Barack Obama who said, actually, that when he walks down the street or tries to go get his car fixed and he has to hear Spanish and sees people waving Mexican flags, that it makes him feel angry. I think it should make anybody, actually, who lives here in the United States and believes in some sort of civic identity, the fact that we have mass pockets of people who have lived here potentially for decades who are unable to speak the language.
But again,
and
we've established that's not really your concern.
No, but it is a huge
because
part
you
of my
certainly
concern.
don't support like a pathway to citizenship with an English language requirement.
Well, okay, let's flip it around. If there was an English language proficiency, if you had a, let's say, decade-long track record where you could prove that you not only had the skills to actually get some sort of not only education, had the education requirement, had the ability, the skills to make sure that you're never going to be on welfare, that you're going to be additive, if you could actually prove that your job and what you're adding to America would not be able to depress or be used as some sort of H-1B style cutout, then maybe I would, as long as there was also stringent and massive enforcement on illegal immigration. But that's not the system. And that's why I don't entertain the amnesty or any of that right now, because I know it basically is a blank check giveaway to all of the people here with none of the same requirements. This is the problem, too, about the broader conversation, I think, around immigration, specifically, is like what you were saying earlier, the conflation of skilled and unskilled makes it so we can be like, oh, well, broadly together, they're all the same.
But don't you oppose all immigration?
No, I don't oppose all immigration.
Net zero?
No, our current system, so let's explain again. When I oppose immigration, I'm saying in the interim period, we need an immigration moratorium because we have so many tens of millions of foreign-born citizens, which is causing, and again, in my opinion, mass social chaos. I didn't say no immigration forever. I think probably for the next 20, maybe 25 years. I think it's important. Now, if you look at it broadly, look, this is a natural experiment.
To the country. I think it'd be bad for Americans. I think it'd be bad for everyone. And I don't agree with your assessment that immigrants are the cause of like social chaos. And
well, they're a big
that there's this massive
How
issue
can you have a
of
society when people don't speak the same language?
There's
it's simple.
In actuality, the studies that have been done have found that new immigrants in this era assimilate into American culture much faster, partly because American culture is so globally dominant that there's already a lot of sort of American cultural spread around the world. And so the, acquisition of whatever, sort of core American cultural traits are happens at a much faster clip than it did in previous generations.
But how can it continue to go apace when you're adding 1.5 million more per year and you have mass pockets of people who don't speak any English and which apparently it's not even a societal expectation that you can live here for over a decade? I mean, I think the reason that bothers me so much is because we have no civic understanding.
If you want to motivate people to learn English, if that's a specific thing, there's a very clear way to do that. You create a pathway to citizenship that is contingent on some sort of English language acquisition, which I certainly would be okay with, and I think most Democrats would support. But that's not what you want.
I actually don't think that they would support it because it would have to be paired with a
That is
massive,
not true. They have this has long been the standard as Democratic Party position since, but probably before Barack Obama.
But they don't believe in the actual enforcement and the deportation.
That's not true.
No,
Barack Obama, again, was the deporter in chief.
Yes.
Joe Biden deported more people than Donald Trump deported. Okay, so it's such a canard that Democrats are open borders. It's for they never have been.
How did 10 to 12 million people illegally enter the country under the last administration? Even if Joe Biden deported, quote, more numbers, 10 to 12 million people are here illegally because of him. It's a basic fact. And by the way, it's a huge reason why the election was lost. This is the lack of grappling, and you're saying the lack of enforcement, because what it comes down to it is not everybody's going to pass those stringent requirements that we just laid out. So what happens? They got to go. And when it's time for them to go, well, that's when I know, everybody comes bleeding heart and nobody's ever supposed to leave.
But the thing is,
and nobody actually believes in sending them back.
This is where I think I'm confused by your position. And then, we can wrap this up. I'll let you have the last word. Sure. We can wrap this up and move on. Because you don't want any immigration. But then you're also saying, well, you would theoretically support a pathway to citizenship that has English language, but then you don't think Democrats will support it. Like, what do you actually think? Is the English language thing important? It just seems to me that you think immigrants are bad for society.
No,
and I disagree.
No, I don't think
I think immigrants have been the probably most important part of America developing into the country that it is. I look at Kilmar Garcia and I see someone who's been a valuable member, who isn't on welfare, who is a sheet metal apprentice.
He's not on welfare because he's not a citizen. Like, it's not, like, this is my point.
Yeah, but
my point
he
is
is
if
working.
he were
Like, he's
to get,
I don't know what more you want from him.
People who worked aren't on welfare? That's, come on, like, look, 40% of the country's on food stamps right now, as if they're not all working. Like, that's my point, is that if you have a low wage and you're unable to actually provide for yourself.
There's no indication that he's some, like, bottom feeder who can't support himself. Not that I even, think of people in that way. So it's just, to bring it back, I don't get how you can look at this story and not be first and foremost horrified by the abuse of power by this government against people who are genuinely powerless in this system, and be concerned about what that means for all of us, immigrant and non-immigrant alike.
I think, as I've said, I take your point, and to the extent it has affected Americans, I have spoken out against it. I do think the Trump administration's actions have not only been outrageous, but deeply damaging to the cause that I actually support. And just to wrap it all together for what you were saying, you were saying, I think that all immigrants are bad for the country. No, I don't think that. I think that more immigrants would be bad for the country. When I say, could I conceptually see a pathway to citizenship? Perhaps, if paired with stringent enforcement, very high standards for who those people were, and no more future immigration. All of these things are actually non-contradictory, because what they come towards is to try and have a society which can actually hash out its differences and have a civic understanding, and not be one of ethnic pockets which creates huge strife. Basically, it degrades our overall social fabric, which I believe is the current system as it is right now. Deportation and enforcement is very important. Until I see any particular movement on that, that's why we shouldn't even entertain so-called pathway to citizenship talk. And especially if it were to be paired with the current endorsement of the system, which brings some 1.5 million people, new people, into the country every single year. All that would do, in my opinion, is pour gasoline on all the fire. Individually, much of these things work together. Part of the reason why the Republican Party is where it is today, of no amnesty, and basically broke the 2013 consensus, is because it seems like the amnesty always happens, like it did under Reagan, and then the deportation and the enforcement continues to slow, as while the the INS Act of 1965 remains in place, with the current USCIS numbers that are put into place, which brings some 1.5 million people on over and over and over again, and with the highest foreign-born population since the early 1900s, which I will remind you was followed by a massive immigration restriction. There were a lot of problems with that bill. It was explicitly racist, and it kind of caused the Japanese to go away from us. I don't believe in racial quotas or any of that to be implemented, but it had a lot of net social benefits, actually, if you look at the way that we had assimilation over some 40-year period. And I do think that people need to grapple deeply with the fact that we have currently part of our social fabric and destruction is not just economic. A huge part of it is civic, and it comes down to the fact that we have millions of people who entered this country illegally and are somehow, seen as more American, than the rest of us, or better, actually, citizens. Because that's the way that a lot of the Democratic leaders actually even talk about them. I mean, I saw Amy Klobuchar and others. It's like a quasi-system. And actually, as someone who is a child of an immigrant, it's offensive, to say that we're somehow like better than others. I hate this whole model minority thing that people always talk about with Indians. It's like, no, that's preposterous, because it's saying that like we're better than the people who are already here. No, we're all the same. And we should strive to actually all kind of be the same and to reach that understanding. That's my broad thing. You're happy to respond. Yeah.
Immigrants aren't the problem.
Okay. I mean,
The billionaire class that has rigged the system and that pits us against each other and makes it into some freaking zero-sum game that yes, delights in paying people under the table and violating their labor rights. That's the problem. And if you want to deal with, the tearing of social fabric and the, societal strife, the best thing you could do is to make sure people can get a good job with a high wage and have access to healthcare and housing, and for that to be affordable, and for people to be able to feel, again, like it is possible to aspire to a middle-class life. And I think immigrants have very little to do with that, and generally are positive in terms of their contribution to society and helping to people to achieve.
This will be the central question of our time. By the way, I'm probably going to lose this fight, just so everybody knows, thanks to most of the actions of the Trump administration, which I've got my eyes very wide open to. So just in case anybody's wondering which direction, you're probably going to win, Krystal, after the Trump administration is out of power, in my opinion.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.